Sonar X3 ships with Nomad Factory's Blue Tube suite, a collection of processors and effects that cover just about every scenario. They're designed to provide warm analog type sound, yet require little CPU power. Let's have a look at them. They can be found in the Audio Effects tab of the plugin browser. By default, they are found in the Nomad Factory subfolder within the VST2 folder. Common to all of them is the preset management area at the top. Here presets can be loaded and saved. There's also a utility menu with online support and other options. Controls on all of them can be reset to the default setting by control clicking on them. They can be grouped into three main types: dynamic processors, EQ processors, and effects. There's also a channel strip processor, the analog track box. Let's look at dynamic processors first. As the name suggests, these are designed to affect dynamic range. Generally speaking, that means making the loud bits or peaks quieter, which in turn allows the quiet bits to be louder without making the peaks too loud. The overall effect is to make the material a more consistent level. Of course, there are exceptions which we'll look at shortly. There are several parameters on each processor that, amongst others, allow us to control what is considered a peak, how much to reduce them by, and how loud to make the overall track. The dynamic processors can be further subdivided. There are two compressors, the CP2S and the FA770. As mentioned earlier, compressors are designed to reduce dynamic range. They do that by compressing or reducing the volume of peaks. There are a couple of different types of compressors: variable threshold and fixed threshold. The threshold is the level at which the compressor starts to work. The analog CP2S is a variable threshold type. This means that there is a control to adjust the threshold, and reducing it means more signal goes over it, so more compression or gain reduction takes place. The lower the threshold, the more compression. The amount of compression is indicated by the meter if it's in gain reduction mode. That's indicated by the buttons and LEDs beneath it. If the meter has in mode selected, it indicates a signal entering the compressor, while out mode, the signal level leaving it. How much compression takes place on the signal over the threshold is controlled with a ratio control. Ratio is the amount that a signal is reduced. 2:1, for example, means that for every 2 decibels that the signal is over the threshold, it's reduced to 1. 5:1 means 5 decibels over is reduced to 1, and so on. The higher the ratio, the greater the compression. You can see from this that compression is controlled by balancing these two controls, threshold and ratio. The attack parameter controls how quickly the compressor reacts once the threshold has been crossed. Usually measured in milliseconds, the lower this figure, the quicker the compressor starts to work. Attack can help maintain the natural sound of an instrument. Slowing down when the compressor starts working allows the early part of the signal through unaffected. Release controls how long the compression continues once the output level has fallen beneath the input level. The higher this figure, the longer the compression remains before returning to normal. Too fast and the compressor will pump the signal as the release lets go and the attack takes over again. Too slow and the compressor will take too long, and in the extreme, never release before the next attack phase happens. The makeup gain parameter allows adjustment of the final output. It would be usual to set this control to make up the signal by the same amount of gain reduction that's been applied. The RMS peak switch changes mode from one to the other, setting whether the compressor responds to peak or RMS levels. Use the bypass switch to make A/B comparisons between processed and unprocessed material. Most dynamic processors have some or all of these controls, or variations of them. So let's look at the FA770 modelled on a classic analog compressor. It too has a 3-mode meter on the left. Switch between input, output and gain reduction using the relevant buttons. Operation is slightly different in that it has a fixed ratio setting. This makes setup slightly easier than with some compressors, and it also has an input control. The attack and release works differently too. Here, instead of individual controls, there is a time constant control, which are effectively attack-release presets. The actual settings are displayed in the information area to the right of the preset management area at the top. In addition, there are 2 attack modes chosen with the A/B buttons. The B mode has much slower attack time. Make-up gain and the bypass buttons work in the same way as on the CP2S. In addition to the compressors, there are two limiters, the Brickwall BW2S and Master Limiter LM2S. Limiters are a harder, more severe form of compression. Think of a limiter as a compressor with a very high ratio. The Brickwall BW2S is quite straightforward and easy to use, making it ideal for individual tracks or buses. The Brickwall moniker means that it's capable of completely stopping peaks getting through at all, not just reducing them. This is controlled by the peak remover switch at the top. On the left is the threshold control, allowing control over when the limiter kicks in. Turning this clockwise reduces threshold, which has the effect of increasing the overall loudness of the output. Dual meters, one for each channel, are in the centre, and common to the other processors, they are switchable between in, out and gain reduction. To the right is a release control ranging from 1 millisecond to 1 second. A bypass button is above this for A/B comparison. The second limiter is the LM2S. This has more control, tube emulation and an inbuilt EQ. This makes it more suited for mastering or use on the master bus. In the centre is the 3-mode meter, in, out or gain reduction. And as this is a fixed ratio limiter, the threshold parameter controls the amount of compression applied. Unlike the threshold control on the Brickwall limiter though, this won't directly increase output level. This is controlled by the output gain control. Decrease or increase level by turning it anti-clockwise or clockwise respectively. Even greater control can be achieved with the attack and release controls, which work in the same way as those on the CP2S we looked at earlier. To the right is a simple 5-band graphic EQ that can be applied either pre or post gain reduction using the button beneath it. Another type of dynamics processor is the Expander Gate GX622, an expander with a gate option. An expander gate is the opposite of a compressor in that it increases dynamic range and makes quiet sounds quieter. A gate is an expander with a high ratio and is capable of removing material beneath a set level, either partially or completely. One of the main control differences between an expander and a compressor is the way the threshold works. With a compressor, the material above the threshold is processed. With an expander, it's the material beneath the threshold. You'll hear this on default settings as the threshold is increased and the material beneath it is silenced by the gate settings until all material is beneath the threshold and all of it's silenced. We can use this to remove unwanted low-level noise from a track, typically guitar amplifier hum or mic spill from other instruments, a kick drum on the snare track for example. Let's take a closer look at it.
I sometimes wonder how I got here in such a mess.
The meter on this is a dual functional, switchable between input and output level. The attack parameter controls how quickly the gate opens to allow material above the threshold through. Hold is the time that the gate is held open for once the signal has fallen back beneath the threshold, and decay adjusts how quickly the gate closes. If it closed instantly, it would choke off whatever audio was audible and result in a very unnatural sound. These two controls can be used together to create a much more natural sound. The range setting controls how much gain reduction is applied to material beneath the threshold. Fully anti-clockwise at 0, no reduction at all takes place. And increasing this control applies more and more gain reduction until at infinity the gain is reduced completely. I'll demonstrate this by increasing this control while the threshold is at its lowest and therefore processing all of the track audio. You can hear it acts as a volume control, slowly reducing the level until complete silence. In a real-world situation, the threshold would be increased, allowing the parts of the audio we want to hear while removing those parts that we don't want. You can hear that as I increase the threshold. For even greater control, there are also variable high and low pass filters found over to the right. These only affect the sound that triggers the gate, allowing even greater control. The listen button allows you to hear the audio that's being used to trigger the gate. The de-esser can also be included in this group as it uses band-specific compression to reduce sibilance. Sibilance is the sharp S sounds associated usually with the letters S and C. And not only these sounds can be treated though, but also others such as the sharp T sound when the letter T is sung. The controls are very similar to those that we've already seen. On the left there's a 3-mode meter for in, out and gain. The threshold setting controls at which point compression starts, just like a regular compressor. Where this differs though is that only a specific frequency range is compressed. We can listen to this range using the listen button above the frequency parameter control. The range that it's treated is adjusted using this frequency control, which has 2 modes. There is a high pass filter mode which allows all of the frequencies above the corner frequency to be treated, and the other mode is a band pass filter mode which filters a narrow band around the frequency setting. Sibilance is usually associated with frequencies around 2 to 8 kHz and will vary from voice to voice. The listen facility combined with the filters make it much easier to pinpoint. Once the area has been identified, the threshold is used in combination with the range control to remove or suppress it. The range parameter controls how much gain reduction is applied to the treated frequencies, similar to the range control we saw on the gate. Finally, the master level controls final output, while the bypass switch allows A-B comparison by bypassing the processor. That's the dynamic processors. Next, we'll look at the EQs.